America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome everyone to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today, we're pleased and honored to have Lloyd McDaniels. He's from the backwoods of, Lloyd, Henrietta, Oklahoma?
Down in Hughes County.
Hughes County, Oklahoma. Okay. And although he's sort of like in the backwoods, he's a backwoods guy. He's the most unlikely person in the world that you would ever think would have a deep understanding of the concept of freedom, well-read, and more of a philosopher than anything else, and really pins me down most of the time, and that's rare to do when talking about freedom, because this is my thing, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. He writes emails. He's a regular listener to our program, and because of his deep thinking on the subject of freedom and liberty, and his knowledge and his readings, I thought it would be great for him to be in the studio, and we'll talk about a few things, and maybe we all will learn something from Lloyd from the deep woods of Oklahoma. Lloyd, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
Well, I hope I can live up to those appellations, Joe. I'm just an old guy living back in the woods, and I think a little bit differently sometimes. I'm kind of like a revolutionary in thought, and it's nice that on your webpage that you actually demonstrated partly what I'm going to be talking about today, and that is that people tend to see what they think rather than think what they see.
That's correct.
And so you got my name incorrect
right,
on the webpage because somebody was seeing what was in their mind.
That's right.
Rather than actually thinking what was actually on the page they're looking at.
Right.
And this happens constantly. I do it. Everybody does it. Have you ever tried to proofread one of your own essays?
Oh, never works. Never happened. I have to give it to somebody else.
Because you're thinking what you wrote. And so you can actually look at the mistake and go right over it.
Right. Because
you're seeing what you're thinking rather than rather than the other way around, thinking what you're seeing. And this goes on. It expands throughout all areas of our life, throughout political thought and everything. And one way I can demonstrate this that happened to me when I was 15 years old, and this is an embarrassing thing for me, but I had learned how to drive. I was only 15, but I didn't have my license yet. My brother had gotten a new car. Well, it was a 3-year-old car. And back then, the 3-year-old car was, he'd gotten out of high school and had a job, and he went into debt and got him a car. It had an automatic transmission.
Wow, what's that?
Yeah, because I had learned to drive in old pickups with a 3 on the tree and tractors and stuff like this, So I was used to clutch every time you shift a gear. And my brother, he had this nice car. And so we went to the store. It was about 3 miles up the road from us. And he said, "You want to drive back to the house?" We lived in the country. And so I said, "Yeah." And so he said, "Okay, this is an automatic." He says, "It has a low and it has a drive." And he says, "Now you can put it in low and then go to drive if you want to, or you can just put it in drive and go." Well, me, okay, I was kind of, being 15 and into cars, I like to shift stuff. So I got in there, and my brother sitting beside me, and we had just gotten a 6-pack of bottled pop. You remember we always got bottled pop. Mm-hmm. And it was in the seat beside us. Well, I put it in low gear, and I got to going about 15 or 20 miles an hour. Well, I'm going to shift to drive. Well, the way automatics had that wide brake pedal, I hit the clutch. There's no clutch. I hit the brake pedal. Bottles of pop went all over the floor. I'm embarrassed like crazy because I was still, my brain had trained my body to do what I was used to doing rather than thinking about what I was actually supposed to be doing. Because we train ourselves and we train our mind to see things and do things constantly that we overlook what's actually right in front of us, and it's habit. We go right along and do the same old mistake over and over again, and this happens in speech. It happens throughout all areas of our life. A few little demonstrations. You ever listen to football coaches and basketball coaches that are educated people, and they pronounce athlete with 3 syllables?
Yeah.
You notice that?
Yes.
Here's a guy who's been through college education. He's had to take English composition somewhere along the line to get his degree, and he can't even pronounce properly the name of his specific area of focus.
Yeah.
Athlete. No, it's not athlete, it's athlete. And then they'll be speaking about how tall their players are, or how they can jump, and they'll say height with a th rather than a ht. Height. Well, now part of that goes back because height used to be pronounced height way back in like the 16th century, and some of that could be carried over. But if they'd actually look at the word, it's H-E-I-G-H-T, not T-H. And so here's people in their line of profession that they are just mispronouncing things because they've heard them over and over a certain way. And I've seen this not too long ago. I mean, just maybe a month or so back. I was reading someone who is well educated and should know better, but they don't think. They're trained. They're habitually using words that they think they know, but they don't really.
Yeah. What bothers me is that I won't mention the name of the program, because if I do, I'll get so much hate mail. But it's relatively young people, and they're dating, and they're talking about their dates and stuff like that. And the language is atrocious. First of all, every time they say an inappropriate word, you get beep. So it's like, Bobby beep, da-da, beep. And then when he beep, 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 I mean, it's mostly beeps, but in between there are words. But what was amazing is the use of the English language is grammatically incorrect. There's hardly anything that is correct. Forget about that one thing that's incorrect, right? And what sparked that in my mind is that when you said people think differently, you don't hear that. You hear people think different. And I say to myself, differently. And I don't say it out loud, but I say it in my head. But what was interesting is I watched that program for about, you can't watch something like that unless you're of that culture, for maybe 30 seconds. If you're less than a minute, you're good. And I turned over to the classic movie channel, and there was a movie, I forgot which one, it was a classic movie with, not Katharine Hepburn, but back in the 1940s. And I listened to 2 or 3 dialogues going back and forth. Absolutely perfect English. And I thought to myself, where have we come from? I mean, we used to admire the fact that people were educated enough to become actors and actresses. Or we can't say actress anymore. Everyone's an actor anymore. Excuse me, that's another problem we have. And we actually learned to speak well by watching the movies. Now we attempt to speak well in school, which we don't do at all. We don't teach that at all, because it may violate someone's civil rights or something, right? And then how you learn to speak is what you hear every day, like this repeating, like what I did with your introduction, right? And we're doing it all wrong. And if you correct someone, you get yourself in trouble. I have teachers. and this is a sorrowful story. I have a teacher that's a very close relative, and when this teacher speaks, grammatically, the errors, you can get 3 or 4 errors. And one time I said, how do you go from speaking such as you have now, and I wasn't being critical, I said, I really am curious at this, and then going in the classroom and then teaching English, how do you make that conversion? Never spoke to me after that. That was several years ago. I'm not kidding you. I mean, she will not speak to me again. And I wasn't being nasty. I said, how do you do that? How do you say, well, this ain't doing nothing to, the double, triple negatives and something like that? And then going there and teaching, I said, how do you make that transition? And I was trying to be very clinical about it, Oh my God. And my wife says, thank you very much, dear. Thank you that's holding the family together very well. I know the goof up. But you're right. But my concern is that our country is going downhill in more ways than one, culturally, intellectually. What bothers me is that we can't think anymore, but we have a great memory in that we remember all the crap that we hear on television, and we repeat it, regardless of how illogical it is. And that's why I enjoy having conversations with you, because even when I think I'm being logical, you come back and go, well, not really. And I learn something. And no, don't get me wrong, I'm not mad. I appreciate that, because that makes me think even deeper than I thought I was thinking. But people seem to avoid that. It's a hell of a lot of work, and quite frankly, it's not very pleasant, because what it does, Lloyd, is that it violates all the things all the concepts that you hold dearly to yourself. It violates those things. It says, hey, what you've been believing really was never true. And no one likes to make themselves wrong. Anyway, sorry for the long diatribe. But,
Well, what you said is very much correct in the fact that part of it is the fact that if you try to correct someone, so it's difficult to try to tell somebody that you just did something wrong, so we usually overlook it. But it gets into a habit form. In other words, everything a person does, they like to use the least amount of effort possible to do it, whether it's work, thinking, or whatever. And when it comes to thought, our brain has patterned over the years certain little files we put in little file cabinets in our brain, and we have little trigger words that come out, and rather than have to think deeply about something, all we have to do is pull out that little canned answer that's stuck there in our brain,
right.
Pull it out, because we've repeated it over and over again in our mind or used it vocally. And so you don't have to think, because you've already got the superficial answer for it. So you get rid of actual thinking. And one word that I was going to go into was, have you heard people say that I stood there with bated breath?
Yes.
Now you guys probably know that that's incorrect, right?
I don't even know what that means.
Well, you shouldn't know what that means.
I don't know what it means. I hear it.
I think, what does bated breath mean? What, do you put a worm on your tongue? and okay, my breath is baited. No, and I saw, this is what I was saying earlier, I saw this in print from someone who's very well educated. The word is abated, as in stopped breath.
Abated.
Abated.
Okay.
Or, I used to be in asbestos abatement. You're trying to stop the asbestos, and so your breath is stopped, so it's abated, but you hear people repeatedly say it, or even in print, bated breath. And when you actually stop and think about it, that makes absolutely no sense at all.
But that's your problem. You stop and you thought about it. We don't think anymore. I'm repeating myself for the 19th time at least. Now, you're keeping track, right? At least, here we go again, right? I always wondered, I used to try to watch. I don't like to watch monster movies because they're so stupid. But,
I love them.
I like to watch them, but I can't make sense of them. I mean, I wish they made sense. Some of the old ones were good. The new ones, they're just too much flair, Anyway, I really try to watch zombie movies. And the reason why I never went through entire zombie movies is I never understood them. I said, well, the guy, everyone's dragging their right foot and they're all bleeding from the left side of their mouth. And, they're dead, but they're not dead. They want to eat people, but they're not hungry. They want to kill, but they're dead. Nothing made sense. And one day this was a couple of years ago, I flipped over in the Living Dead or whatever it was on TV. And I look in and I said, and I usually watch for about 30 seconds and then I can't take it anymore. I said, how dumb of me. I said, now I understand what the zombie movies are about. It's not a monster or horror film. It's a metaphor. These people are telling us, you, America, the American, are zombies. You just go along, whatever's being told to you, you take, you absorb, you listen to Fox News or MSNBC or whatever, or even my girlfriend Sally, you even may listen to her once in a while, and she's a zombie over here, No, you listen to that and then you repeat it. You don't question it. And once that occurred, I said, now I understand zombie movies. I've said this about 30 times on AM, sure people are hanging up right now because they've heard it so many times. But that's exactly what I think you're talking about, is we go along and whatever we hear, we repeat. What bothers me about most of the news on television, I'm not picking on Fox News in particular, although I'm really disappointed. They should know better, MSNBC I never had any hope for, but now that Trump is in office, at least they're thinking a little bit more critically. Of course, when Obama was in office, nothing was critically then Fox News was thinking more critically. That's the way it goes. And the mainstream media is absolutely worthless. Is that when people listen to them, they don't question. They'll say something. They'll say, we send fighters over to Syria, blah, blah, and blah, blah, blah. But no one in the studio says, excuse me, why did we do that? Didn't Trump during before his election say that we should not be interfering with the countries in the Middle East and whatever, we should stop, none of that's brought up. It's like all that past history we dump and now we make new history by virtue of the news. And please don't think.
Yeah. Forgot what I was going to say, Joe, after you said all that. Okay. No, I was going to bring, but you bring up like Fox News, and we just repeat. That is one of the things. Is it's easy for people to hear something and repeat here and repeat here and repeat, wash and rinse. Same old thing. But the catchy sayings are especially something that people don't think about. And one that I've heard, and it's in textbooks now and everything, is you remember John F. Kennedy, whenever he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
I never understood that.
Well,
I'll be honest with you, I never understood that.
Sounded good. To people, it sounded great, and they put laud, all this, and it sounded really terrific. But when you actually think about it, wait a minute, ask not what your country can do for you. I can understand that. We're not supposed to be asking the country to do something for us, but then he says, ask what you can do for your country. Well, if you're a globalist or a nationalist and thinking that government is all powerful, that sounds right. We're all subservient to the government, and our job is to serve the government.
Right.
Yeah. So I ask the question, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask, what can I do for myself?
Right.
Because we're supposed to be individuals. And by doing something for yourself, your country will be benefited by it.
Right.
Because that's the whole philosophy of our nation, is individuals being free to do their own thing and make their own way. And the country becoming great is simply a symptom a result of individuals doing things independently. And so rather than trying to think, how can I make my country great? Forget about the country. Make yourself great.
And that will make the country great.
That makes the country great.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of like cities, they want to revitalize the inner city and all of this kind of thing. And so they want to, we can get the planning committee to do this, and we can do that, and we can get some contractors and some advisors. And
you mean the guy's brother-in-law?
Yeah, usually. Okay. And all of this, and I think, what made the city vital in the first place was the fact that happened to be a place where people could go to get the things they couldn't get anywhere else. And unless you can provide that environment again, all of your expenditure is going to be basically wasted. You could cut taxes real low in the inner city, and you would probably get some business that way.
Right.
But the way it is today, there are other places you can go to get your store items. And so, but that's the way government thinks. And let me go. Okay, one word that comes up is the word freedom. What does freedom mean? What, Sally? What?
I'm not on the air.
You're not on the air? Okay, Joe. Joe, what does freedom mean?
To me, it means this is something that's not bestowed to me by government. This is my inalienable rights, if you want to say bestowed by God, or however you want to define it. And I am free to do whatever I want to do, provided I do not infringe upon the equal rights of others. That's my definition of freedom. May be all wrong, but that's the way I've always interpreted it.
Basically, freedom from or absence of restraints.
Right. That's right. That'd be better.
Absence of restraints.
Right.
Absence of what is government?
Restraint.
Okay. So freedom is absence of restraint or absence of government,
right.
Which absence of government is anarchy.
Right.
So when people talk about we need freedom, you have to pin them down. So you want anarchy.
Right.
But anarchy has been given this bad connotations, which it shouldn't have, because true anarchy, if you boil it down, that means absence of government, but also that's the only way you can have freedom is without government.
Yeah.
And yet what do we do with the Constitution? We form a government to provide us freedom. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, our founding fathers were very much that way. I mean, they in the Federalist Papers, they fought this concept, and even libertarians today. I know, for example, Jacob Hornberger, who's the head guy on the Future Freedom Foundation, and he's written many articles on anarchy versus libertarianism, and he espouses a anarchy light, basically, where the government has a role, but it's extremely, extremely limited, because there are situations when you need a governing body to oversee a particular culture or a particular town or whatever. And he makes a very good case for that. But it is so far from where we are today that it's not even recognizable. His interpretation of having a limited government would be considered anarchy in anyone else's eyes, So sometimes it may be, and I read this article a few months ago, and I wish it's fresher in my mind, because I would give you some examples, and I just don't remember them. But he made a good case for it. But the case for it was very, very far from where we are now, because he's truly a free market guy. I mean, doesn't want government touching anything, and there's a case many people have written. Even our road system, our road system should be free. If you want to live somewhere, you build a house, you build a road with it. There's problems with that, but you have to maintain the road and whatever. If you want to, many companies, when they build an outlet somewhere, they not only build the store, but they build the parking lot and the roads going into the parking lot. And what true freedom means, then you build the road getting to the place as well. Mm-hmm. So, and there are those who are real freedom fighters who feel that sometimes there's some government sort of coordinating all this activity, because you're going to have to elect someone to do that. You're not going to have a store manager do that. And I guess there may be a case for that. But we are so far from that. If we were there, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and we wouldn't have this radio program, quite frankly.
Well, all you have to do is come out where I live. We maintain our own road. The county doesn't do it. In fact, I've got some rocks in the back of my pickup right now that when I go back home, I'm going to put in one of the holes where it's at. And I had to build my own driveway into my place, about 600 feet of driveway. I had to cut down trees, bust rocks and stuff, make my own driveway in. We have, with the government, we're able to do certain things that we would not be able to do individually. And there is a for voluntary collectivism, which is what's supposed to be, but what we have with government is involuntary collectivism.
That's correct, right.
But back onto the freedom and anarchy thing again. So we have determined that true freedom is anarchy, but when you get to trying to actually get to the idealism of anarchy, you actually can never get to the true libertarian spirit of absence of government unless you are self-governed.
Right.
That's the only way. Herbert Spencer wrote of this in Social Statics. Very good book. If you like Bastiat, When the Law, and his other writings, Spencer goes into it way, way deeper. And but even he recognized the fact, because he wrote of the equal freedom. Everyone able to do anything as long as they're not violating another one's rights. But he recognized the practicality that it would never come into existence until people themselves were self-governed. Until you have good people, you cannot build a good society, because society is built of the component parts of each of the individuals. And if you have bad people, you are never going to achieve that perfect society.
But we are so far from that. Recently I saw a documentary on the city of Memphis, Tennessee. It's an absolute mess. 1/3 of the population is unemployed or on some sort of welfare. 1/3 of the population, and now people are starting to lose. Even the people on government. Do we have a tornado warning? I hear a buzz in my background. I think we.
Thunderstorm.
Oh, thunderstorm.
Tornadoes in Broken Arrow.
Okay. Thank you. Wow, folks, we may have a tornado passing by. Okay, Sally, stand by the window, protect us. All right. But people are actually, from this total chaos and where poverty is incredibly high, people are starting to realize that even being on the government dole is not the answer, and they are taking the initiative to become entrepreneurs, illegal entrepreneurs. And those that are doing it are doing phenomenally well. There was one in this one documentary where a person went in and decided to, she understood accounting. The woman, she was a black woman, she understood accounting. She worked as an accountant, but she wasn't a certified public accountant, but she understood accounting. And she started this tax preparation, And she said, my first week, she made $35,000. $35,000. To me, that's incomprehensible, And here's a woman near starving to death and becoming an operator, and in 1 week make $35,000 in revenue. And all she had was this little wooden house with with a room and a table and a chair and a computer. Much less than we have in the studio. And she made how come we don't make $35,000 a week in the studio, But that's a classic case. What I think where this stems is that the biggest mistake we ever made is go to the public school system, where government got involved in schooling. because it's our parents that, my parents were responsible for my education. I'm responsible for my children's education, not the government. And we've abdicated our responsibility to the government. And now that we've trained all our children to become zombies, get college educations, go $82,000 in debt with degrees in sociology and go on unemployment. That's the sequence, right? Right, Sally? That's the sequence right now, right? And we've destroyed our society, and yet we say we complain about the school system. No, I don't complain about the school system. I complain about parenting. Why don't you keep your kids at home? Keep them in the backyard. Let them eat dirt. They'll become, they'll learn something. Put them in school. They'll learn nothing other than try to defend themselves. What say ye about that?
Well, I've read a book quite a while ago. The Magical Child, I believe it was, and it went into the fact that in other countries where children were raised without, going to nursery school and such like this, but it was universal through children that actually trying to learn abstract information was really harmful to the child until they were actually about 7 years old. And the children are still in discovery mode all the way up through 5, 6 years old. And you start trying to force numbers and equations onto them at that early age. What you do, you truncate their discovery, which is part of the growing process. It's just like a plant or something. A plant's got to grow so far before it starts to put on this leaf, and then it's got to grow a little farther before it can do that. And you're trying to graft in leaves on a plant that isn't ready to support them yet. And so we end up basically making kind of hybrid children, which we've shut off about 2 years or 3 years of their discovery and tried to force education into them. But if you allow the child to go to about 7 years old, of course the state would never allow you to do this before you actually put them into a educational environment, that they actually just gobble that stuff up right down the line faster than the other children. It's a neat little book that I read it several years ago, but it shows how we have, through our social understanding, we have actually hurt the children more by trying to educate them too fast. Yeah.
What's really interesting, statistically, over one half of the multi-billionaires in this world never went to college, right? And many of them did not go to high school, and if they did, they were thrown out or they did terribly. Because they didn't want to sit in a classroom listening to garbage and having to repeat it. It was of no interest to them. And yet they became billionaires. And how many kids graduate with college degrees today and don't have a job and don't know what to do? Can't do anything. They have no functioning abilities whatsoever.
Well, Joe, I have no college degree. How come I'm not a billionaire?
What? But you're brilliant. See, that's the problem. See, if you were so damn brilliant, you'd be smart. I mean, you'd be rich, rather.
Okay. Here's another one. You understand that you Fox News people, the conservative Republican, they are very patriotic. Say the Pledge of Allegiance, salute the flag, and all of this.
No, they're zombies. Excuse me, I hate to interrupt you. No, Republicans are zombies, just like the Democrats. They are zombies. Sally is a zombie. She doesn't know she's a zombie. Here she goes. She's a zombie. She really. Trump can say the moon is a cube, it's not round. Next day, Sally says, "Did you know the moon is a cube and not round?" I mean, they're zombies. They're all zombies. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, when you start to think about the Pledge of Allegiance, when you say
it's dumb.
First off,
it's dumb, stupid. I don't pledge allegiance to a flag.
Exactly,
because a flag.
Because a lot of these people are also they're very conservative, they're religious, they're patriotic, and they believe in states' rights. And when you say the Pledge of Allegiance, first off, you're basically kind of worshiping an idol, an image. So that kind of goes against the religious thing. And you go into it, and I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the north for which it stands. It gets to the part where it says, indivisible. Now wait a minute. If you believe in states' rights, one nation, indivisible, if you've got a nation of states that's indivisible, how do you believe in states' rights?
That's right. Yeah, it's very contradictory. And then that argument continues. And the thing that I have a problem with is that when people discuss it, they say, "Oh, you're anti-American. You must be a communist." And that's because
the
they don't think they listen to the same program Sally does.
See, that's the trigger word that makes people think, because they think that everything is black and white. There's no in between. That if you're going to criticize something about the United States, you must be anti-United States.
That's right.
But you can't be, critical and also thinking in another way. Whereas when you think about the Pledge of Allegiance, it was created by Francis Bellamy, who was the cousin of Edward Bellamy, who wrote "Looking Backwards," and they were socialists. And this was
he was a minister, wasn't he?
Yeah. I think he was. He also wrote a magazine, or was an editor of a magazine, But this was at a time after the Civil War when many people in the South were still very angry. This is like 30 years after the so-called Civil War, the War of Northern Aggression, that they still believed they did not get to have their states' rights and separate from the northern part.
Right.
And so that they were trying to quell the people in the South, but still believing that the nation could be separated individually, that a state could secede. And so if you could get all the children in school to say this pledge, and say the one nation, indivisible.
Right.
All of a sudden, you inculcate in the minds of the children, they're programmed, they're conditioned to believe that the nation can never be separated. And so eventually all of your southern people will die off, and all of your children will believe, that there's no such thing as a state being able to secede.
Yeah.
Which they proved in 1861, April the 12th, Fort Sumter. When they tried to do it, it was all after that. They proved, the states cannot secede.
Yeah.
So the states are not free. They are subservient to the nation itself.
Now, all of this conversation would be unnecessary if the government federal government really followed through with the true intent of our founding fathers, saying that everyone is free to do whatever they want, provided they don't infringe upon the equal rights of others. And if everyone is free that way, so are the states free the same way. But we can do things as a group as well, and we can be a nation under that law. And I have no problem with that. Now, we can argue all the minutiae about it, but really I have no problem with that. The problem we have is that once we have that, then it's progressive. It gets worse, tighter and tighter. And, today we have, there's freedom indexes done by think tanks all over the world. There's a personal freedom index, there's a general freedom index, there's a business freedom index. And just to give you an idea, which really surprised me, I think this is 2015 or 2016 is when they completed the last one of the business index of the world. And of the 31 industrialized nations, the United States came out. Now, number one happened to be Hong Kong, by the way, part of China, right? The United States came out out of 31 large 30 industrialized nations, came out number 28 and losing ground. In other words, we're at the bottom. But if I mention that to people get angry and they say, "What are you, a communist?" I really, literally, they say that. They want to bestow some sort of, inflict me with a name, so they say, "Oh, you're a communist, that's why you're anti-American." That made me anti-American to think that we're not number one in everything. And I said, we can't think at all. I'm afraid for this nation. I've never been so afraid for this nation as I am today. And at my age, I shouldn't give a damn. I'll be honest with you. But I am. I'm more concerned today than I ever have been. And I think what made Trump win is Trump said all the right populist words. We're going to make America great again. Without anyone saying, excuse me, hey, Don, excuse me, how are you going to do that? Don't ask any questions. Just listen to the sound bite and there we go. Off we go. And guess what we do? We start killing people overseas. That's how we make America great. Why didn't I think of that? How dumb of me.
Well, that's what usually works to get the bankers to making more money. All the wars go from there. But you were speaking of the Founding Fathers. We kind of, in our history books, we have this, glorified thought of them. But when they were in Philadelphia trying to get rid of the Articles of Confederation, and the people were there were some reporters that were trying to find out what they were doing. The Founding Fathers were so open to liberty that they bought the Pennsylvania Herald newspaper because it was trying to report what they were doing so that they could shut up anyone from finding out what was going on in the Constitutional Convention. And they used the same type of 1984 thought of thinking, because the people in the Articles of Confederation, the colonies were confederated or federated. They were not one nation. They were independent colonies. Right. And that was the problem that Hamilton and Madison tended to have. So they said, okay, we're a party of Federalists. They took the name Federalist to make it sound like they were for
Federation, right?
For Federation, when actually they were for nationalism. And so that left the people opposed to Madison and Hamilton to have to take the term anti-federalist, when actually they were the real Federalists who didn't want the nation that's indivisible. They wanted states federated together only. Right. And so it's kind of like the Patriot Act. Well, it's real patriotic to give up your Fourth Amendment, They always name all these laws and these acts the opposite of what they really are. And that's what the founders did as well. They had the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Well, you had to turn the names around if you really understood. But the average person reading a newspaper back then, they just took it, okay, we believe in federalism, so the Federalists must be right. So they were able to sell themselves for something that they weren't. The same way you can sell the Patriot Act to people who believe in the Constitution, yet the Patriot Act takes away your Bill of Rights. The NDAA, they just keep taking away more rights, and yet it's National Security Authorization Act. We want our nation to be secure, correct? Oh, yeah, we want to be patriotic, so we got to have a Patriot Act. It just goes on and on. But this goes into when I was writing to you, and you started questioning me about the trade deficit. That was an issue. That was a side issue.
I never questioned you. I never questioned you.
Well,
I would never question you.
This is something I wanted to get into, and it has to be. And I wanted to get into it a little bit earlier, but it doesn't work always the same way you want it to work. But we are going to have some type of banking collapse. We all know that, I believe. Yes. The monetary system we have is going to collapse. And as I was talking about how we tend to fool ourselves in our thinking, well, our society has fooled ourselves for decades.
But wait a minute. Wait a minute. Lloyd, I thought Trump was going to make America great again.
Well,
I heard that. I heard that on television. It's got to be true. Ask Sally. She knows that.
This has nothing to do with any of that. This has to do with the fact of our monetary system, the way it is set up, and with our reserve status, our currency being the world reserve currency. That cannot exist. A world reserve currency just simply cannot exist without destroying itself. Because it's a Ponzi scheme the same way the Federal Reserve and our Federal Reserve notes is a Ponzi scheme. The trade deficit is kind of like your engine light that comes on, and it tells you, hey, we're buying a lot more than we're selling. Now, you say that to an economist, the first thing, especially if they're like an Austrian economist, which I'm an Austrian economist, but I'm a thinking one. This is that trigger word.
Right.
If you say trade deficit, they automatically their brain switches from thinking to pulling out that file out of their brain and using that little thing that they teach the kids in class, and they think, oh, you must be for mercantilism, the British system, and because that's what the old argument was with Adam Smith whenever he was bringing it out. And so they say, well, I have a trade deficit with McDonald's. McDonald's doesn't buy anything from me. That sounds cute and cutesy and all, but they don't answer the question. Okay, yeah, you have a trade deficit with McDonald's. You have a trade deficit with Walmart. But in the overall scheme of things, unless you have more money coming in from somewhere else than you have going out, or at least an equivalent, you're running a deficit and you're going to be paying interest on it. Now here's the kind of a paradox. If you're going to have a world reserve currency, you have to have a trade deficit, because every one of those countries on that map over there, if they're going to have your currency, the only way they can have it is by you printing a whole bunches and bunches of dollars and buying their stuff so that they can have the money over there. So so by us having a world reserve currency, we send them paper and get product back. And to the economist, boy, that sounds great. We're just printing paper, we're getting the stuff back. Problem is, we pay interest on all that paper.
Right. Yeah.
And so.
But in which we have to print more money.
Yeah, to print more money with more interest,
right,
to continue to doing it. But it is not the trade deficit that is the real problem. Again, the trade deficit is the engine light on the dash,
right,
that tells you, just like if your credit card bill comes in and you make $100 a month and you're spending $110 a month, you've got a problem. Now, the economist says, well, we can fix that by being more productive internally. Well, okay, if we were internally being more productive, we would see greater infrastructure repair, and we would see that our internal debts are going down, and that we actually have
personally we would not be
we would have fewer people getting out of college and living with their parents instead of getting a job. So the productivity that you have on your little statistics there, they may not be representing what you think, because economists, they live and die on statistics, numbers, charts, and graphs. And they look at those and they're so narrowly focused they can't see what else is going on. So by having our and of course the reason our dollar being a world reserve currency, the reason it is accepted is because it's so overvalued compared to other currencies. Right. It has to be overvalued. The only way we can have it overvalued is by continuing to more or less coerce other countries into using it whenever they don't want to, which is why we have our United States Navy all over the world, right, why we have military bases all over the world, why we put missile batteries in all over the world. For any country that decides to maybe not go along with the United States, in order to keep the dollar propped up, we have our military all over the world. And by having our currency overvalued, people in this country have been deluded into believing that we are so much wealthier than what we really are. So we get paid a whole lot. For all my life, we have been paid a lot more than we've been worth. Seriously. And people don't want to believe that. But that's the reason that we started having basically, the immigration thing, multifaceted as most everything is. Johnson, whenever he did the immigration reform and the social welfare thing, encouraged a lot of people to come here and get welfare and more immigrants.
Right, that's his, yeah, right.
But what was bringing them in before that was the fact that a person could come here from another country and make more money than they could over there.
Right.
And so as long as we had this strong dollar and propping it up around the world, we started drawing more people in. But then there was a lot of companies that said, hey, you know what? We can get that cheap labor over there by moving our factory to another country. So our factory started leaving to get the cheaper labor, because everything boils down to labor. The cost of everything boils down to labor, all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. It's all labor cost. And so just as the Michigan factories and things went to the south first, and got the cheap labor for the southern labor, then they started going to China and different countries to get cheaper labor. And we started importing a lot of people from other countries into our country because we could get them to work more cheaply. So now on the books again, the economist sees we're getting more productive. Well, you're measuring two different things here. You had U.S. workers. Now you've got Pakistanis and Mexicans working in that plant where the U.S. workers used to work. And what used to be and made the United States great at one time was the philosophy, the culture, and the social values that the people of the United States had. And you're bringing in a lot of people that don't have those same values. Now, in the old days, immigration was good because the people that came here prior to Johnson,
My father was one of them, by the way.
Yeah,
he came here with not a dime in his pocket.
He didn't expect to get a welfare check and food stamps and a free house.
He worked at a Polish piano factory. They beat the hell out of him every night. I really did.
But
He tells that story all the time.
Those immigrants, they came here and they had to conform some way or other, at least partially, to the spirit of the United States in order to survive. They had to work here, and they would buy land here. And so they actually had a vested interest in this country being good. Today, and especially with the United Nations bringing in these alleged refugees, which I think only about 3% are actual refugees, and about 80% are men between 15 and 45. And then, according to Jill Noble, they get coached to say that they've got some type of disability so they can get Social Security disability benefits. Then they get welfare, they get the food stamps, then they get free housing. They have no vested interest to make this country. They're coming here just to get the handouts.
Yeah, but all of this, I don't want to interrupt you, your train of thought. But we became less productive, less competitive in the United States, not so much that we paid our employees more money. Because in order to order something overseas, it's very expensive. You have to get someone to go overseas to monitor what's going on. You have quality assurance problems. You got to put it on ships, bring it over here. And usually the lag is something like 6 months. Typically, it's a round figure, 6 months. My father used to have a glove factory, small glove factory, and some of the work was done overseas. But when Kaiser Roth used to call, the major contractor, and my father was a subcontractor, and said, Victor, we need 100 dozen, let's say, white gloves, when women used to wear gloves to dress up, for example, of this style, we need them by Thursday, whatever. My father was able to produce that. But if they gave him 6 months or a year, he went overseas. So, there's real obstacles to making things overseas. And you say, well, why do we do that? Well, that's because the government has put so many restrictions on American manufacturing, and that's the minimum wage, that's insurances, that's health care. I can go through, FICA. I'm a business owner. When I pay someone $15 or $20 an hour, I'm really paying them $20 or $25 an hour, because the extra $5 is all the hidden government fees that I have to pay, right? So the government has made us less productive and too expensive. it wasn't of course, what the government does is they blame, people like Sally who hire people, right? She's a mean boss and she wants all this money for herself and she doesn't want to pay her employees anything. But they don't but that's the scapegoat, she's the scapegoat. But what really was happening is the government wants to inflict these fees on people so they can collect more money to do what they want to do and make people more dependent on the government rather than on themselves, which was the way it was in the turn of the 19th century. So anyway, we have our government to blame for all those aspects of that.
Yes, the government is to blame for all of it. But as I was going back, and I got a little off track. I have a habit of chasing rabbits. But with the trade deficit, whenever you bring that up to an economist as well, you will have them constantly. The other cliche they bring up is, well, in the 19th century, we ran a trade deficit for several decades, and we just prospered like crazy during that time. And when you look on the charts, you'll find that our trade deficit started around 1849, and it lasted up through about 1880. And it just so happens, if you're not an economist and not looking at charts and graphs, and you start again, you're comparing apples and oranges. Our trade deficit today is debt notes. Back then, money was gold.
Right.
We had the gold rush in California, and people don't seem to understand how magnificent that gold rush was. It changed the entire world. California, with all the gold that they had to put in a San Francisco mint, they had to put in the Carson City mint there in Nevada. Before they even got the mints in, the assay offices were actually minting coins. And so on the economist's books, they had, well, it looks like a trade deficit because people are buying a whole lot of stuff from overseas from 49 to 80, and because the ledger that is used has got money on one side and product on the other side. And because if you minted your gold into coins or ingots, well, it's on the money side. But if you took a same press and just put a different die in there and pressed it into the shape of an ashtray or a candle, now you got a gold candle or ashtray.
You got a product.
Now it's called product.
Right.
So what we were doing, we were mining gold. We were turning it into, you could turn it into product or you could turn it into money.
Right.
But both of them are product. Technically and actually, they were mined and pressed, fabricated into product.
Yeah.
And so we would trade, you could trade the ashtray and the candle overseas and get a saddle or a piano or something.
And you'd have a zero.
You would have a trade balance. But because you didn't put it into what would be classified product, but you pressed it into the shape of a coin or an ingot, and then you send it overseas, now you have what, to the economist, all he can see, he's a two-dimensional or a one-dimensional person. They can see only, well, we've got a trade deficit. Look at all the money we're sending over there and getting product.
Right.
So we're running a huge trade deficit. No, we're not. We're sending them our gold coin product for their manufactured product.
What a deal today. We just press a button on a computer, create $1 trillion, and we get all this product for nothing.
We still pay interest on all of it.
I know. And the way we pay the interest is we press another button, right? And we print another $100 trillion, and that's it. Boy, this is great. This is a great time to live, let me tell you.
I never got to the end of it, but what we're going to have to do, eventually we're going to have to get to another monetary system. That we cannot have a world reserve currency. We are going to have a lower standard of living. Now this, unless we have one of these new fancy machines that overproduces energy more than you input, the perpetual motion machines that you see on the internet, unless something like that comes along to produce a whole bunch of energy.
What about Bitcoins? I know very little about it, I'll be honest with you. I don't play with them. I don't have any. I have no interest in them. They're going for like $1,700 and something today. And just a few months ago it was $300. And you go, what happened? And no one knows how much is outstanding. I mean, this is weird stuff. I mean, we should be hearing
Well,
one of those things, you know.
Me living out in the woods and having my chickens and my garden and stuff, I kind of rely on the fact that we may not always have our electronics, and I'm wondering where Bitcoin goes when all the electronics goes. And I think of tulip bulbs. You know, the tulip bulb thing that happened in the Netherlands back, what was it, the 17th century,
right.
you know? That's the reason you got tulips everywhere, because, you know, they all went sky high, and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out. No, Bitcoin is, on a serious level, there is some validity to the fact that people are getting away from the government-issued money, which is what money is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the people's product, not the government's.
Right.
And so they are bypassing it. But I also, I have to think like a criminal, and I wasn't raised like a criminal. I was raised by good parents that were stable and taught me to be honest. And so when I got out in the world, when I encountered other people, I was really naive. I thought people were honest. But I thinking like a criminal, I have to think maybe the government probably has a little bit of handle in some of that Bitcoin stuff and getting people into.
That's a good point, yeah.
You know.
What about SDRs? The latest now is that the special drawing rights of the International Monetary Fund will be the next world reserve currency. And the only reason, and some postulate that the reason why it's not is because the United States, as of this date, in fact that they have just lost that, has a veto right. They all have veto rights, but since the United States currency, the United States in its currency, has I think 15% of the special drawing right weight, that all you need is 15% to veto. And apparently this has come up before. The United States vetoes it, bingo. But now that they allow China into the special drawing rights, and I think they have 9.6%, you know, the United States' proportion is now below 15%. If this is brought up again and all the other nations vote for the United States to cease being the world's reserve currency, it's lights out. Now, this is what I've read by people who talk about these things. I mean, there's no reason for them to lie about that. But apparently, and they're saying, well, wait till the middle of this year, we may see something like that happen. That sounds plausible. If you're going to have if you're going to have some sort of reserve currency, it might as well be an international one. It'll be as worthless as the one is now. Let's be honest.
It cannot exist without force. No government world reserve currency can exist without force, which would mean, and we would be the armed force probably to enforce it. Again, I don't put any hope in something like that. I'm looking at a collapse, and again, I'm saying people need to prepare for a lower standard of living. I'm dead serious. This is what I didn't get around to bringing up, is that we have been fooled all our lives by having this world reserve currency that's overvalued. Right. We've been getting paid too much. The trade deficit and the immigrants coming in to take our jobs and our factories going on, that's the evidence that we have been getting paid too much. Right. That's the reason the businesses want to get the lower labor, because we cost too much.
That's right.
And we're going to have to become accustomed to the fact that we have lived a very high standard. We have $20 trillion in debt. We've been running up the credit card. There's going to be a repossession coming, and now that repossession, people think of it as, well, they back up the truck and take my Corvette. What did Saudi Arabia do just this week? They bought Port Arthur, Texas refinery, the biggest refinery. You know, China had bought Long Beach Island, or Long Beach, a long time ago. And China bought the J.P. Morgan building in New York, the new one that they built, got the big, huge gold vault below it. They've been buying up the abandoned factories up north. They're repossessing. They're taking the station wagon, the Corvette. Because, see, we keep sending them all this money, and we don't sell them anything.
Right.
So they buy your product. It's kind of like you not being able to pay your bills, and somebody says, well, I'm going to take your backyard this week. Yeah. And then I'm going to take your side yard,
right? And
then I'm going to take your other side yard. And if you don't keep doing some business and selling this stuff, we're going to have to use the money that we've been getting. We're going to take your front yard too. All you're going to have is your house, and be able to walk out on your steps.
If I had to ask you, how would you guess that this currency correction, collapse, change takes place? What's your guess at it? I know, and everyone has a wild guess, and I'm not suggesting that anyone is right. I don't. If I knew, believe me, I would tell you, but I don't know. But I'm preparing. By the way, I've been preparing for over 20 years now until Trump came into office, and I know he's going to make America great again, so I'm just getting rid of everything. I'm going into debt. I bought a Corvette, for $84,000, put it on, on a loan for 8 years because everything's going to be fine now. Other than that, where do you see this?
That's one thing that I had basically kind of was asking you at one time was, since we know that the thing is going to collapse, it has to. Just anybody with a little bit of sense knows that it has to collapse. I don't know what it's going to be, so I prepare all the way down the line. I cover myself, just like, see, I've got my land out there, I've got my chickens, I've got my garden, I've got my solar power. So I'm set up kind of like that, very subsistence level. But then I've got a few silver coins, but we will never get back to, we cannot set up a gold or a silver standard without using force again.
Right.
And if we go to a gold standard, which I don't think because we only went to an official gold standard, I think, in 1900. Gold was throughout history always thought of as money, but as far as us putting it officially, it was like 1900 and only lasted until 1933.
Yeah, right.
But because if you're going to print money like we do now, your gold's going to all be gone. That's the reason Nixon had to shut down, because you have to be more restrained. In other words, that's the reason people wanted to get off the gold standards, because they wanted a flexible currency, because gold is a restraining force that keeps you from spending more than you make.
You mean the same Nixon that said he's going to direct Secretary Connally to temporarily remove the dollar from the gold standard to protect it from the speculators in order to make America great again.
Yeah, the speculators that had our paper and had the promise that it was worth the $35 an ounce. Like France, when they brought the ships over here,
I understand that.
Yeah. No, see, that's the problem. Because if you went on a gold standard, you all of a sudden, you have just stopped our productivity, because all productivity in this country is based on credit.
Right.
And credit is based on our fiat money and being able to fractionally reserve it. And when you start trying to fractionally reserve in a gold standard, that's when you start to have runs on banks. So you have to have, the only way you can loan money is if money has actually been produced, and I'm talking about real gold money. You have to have production.
Yeah. See, I think gold and the likes of silver and platinum, all the precious metals, even copper for that matter, we used to have copper as our pennies used to be copper. And the only coin that's the legitimate coin today is the nickel, because it's 75% copper, 25% nickel, and it's worth 5 cents, by the way.
About just over 3 cents now. Nickel is down below $4 a pound. Copper is at around $2.50.
That's temporary.
Temporary. Yeah, I know.
But once it hits the fan, as they say, all of those are going to be worth exponentially more. And gold will not be a gold standard. It will not be a currency. It will not be a medium of exchange, but it will be incredibly valuable. There are many people in that field that say when it finally unravels, people are going to be looking for something. And when they're looking for something, gold, they're not looking at gold $2,000 an ounce. They're talking about gold being $10,000 or $20,000 an ounce, because people are going to want something of value, and nothing else is of value.
Well, I keep an open mind to that, in the fact that I know after World War II, they had Operation Golden Lily. The Japanese had 175 huge vaults in the Philippines, where they had thousands of tons of gold, and that stuff has been kept off the books. And Ed Lansdale went to Truman and told him, or first he told MacArthur. MacArthur sent him. If you've ever read the book Gold Warriors by Sterling and Peggy Seagrave. Have you read that book?
No, I have
You
not.
need to.
Okay.
There's way more gold. They took the Nazi gold and stuff. All this stuff is off of the books.
Yeah.
According to, I think there's right 190 some odd thousand tons of gold officially on the books in the world.
Right.
There's probably twice to three times that much actually. And so we have all that off the books. And if people are calculating the value of gold, based upon that 190 some odd thousand tons, what happens if these people off the books suddenly shove this extra 300,000 tons in on top of it?
I think what you have is that when you have a fear factor, when you have people looking around saying, everything that I perceived as having value no longer does, and you have people in India, for example, know this better than anyone else. They wear their gold, and you touch a woman who's wearing a gold necklace because you want to. I mean, you'll lose your head right in the street. No one touches them because they understand the value of gold and what it represents. When the rest of the world starts valuing gold as people in India value gold, you can't have enough of it. It'll still go up. Now, what it'll go up to may go up $1,000. It may go up $100,000. No one knows. That's a secret. But unfortunately, we're out of time.
Okay. Ask yourself, what's the dollar going to be worth at that time?
Oh, well, it's not worth anything now, so it's be worth a little bit less, Yeah. Lloyd, I want to thank you so much. Lloyd from the backwoods, okay?
The deep woods.
The deep woods. I'm sorry, Lloyd from the deep woods. I want to thank you so much for being on our program today. I really enjoyed it. I hope I didn't give you too much of a hard time. And I hope you will accept our invitation to return at a later date. We'll jab again.
If I can get up here, it's a long ways.
Okay, well, we certainly appreciate it. We certainly do.
All right, well, thank you,
Thank you so
Joe.
much. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. And before I leave, please let me ask you to subscribe to our website by hitting the subscribe button on libertytalkradio.com. And we're also on YouTube as well, so subscribe there as well, and you'll get be notified of our next show. Thank you so much, and stay well, stay tuned.